Great, well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you to the students who just put those videos together. I mean, hearing your voices is incredibly important. And you made one of the numbers that we just heard that the WEF tallies suggesting that over 1 billion climate refugees could be in the world by 2050. That's actually larger than the World Bank estimate of just hundreds of millions. Whatever the final number, it's massive. The flows of people who are being forced to leave their homes due to climate catastrophes is not at all slowing down. And I'm really pleased to welcome our panel today to talk about this. Let me start with Michael Oppenheimer of Princeton. Michael, are we ready?
Well, no, we're not ready, that's clear. People have migrated internally in countries and across international borders forever due to climate. The question is, how will those flows be changed, and how will we even be able to distinguish them from the other flows that occur for, say, socioeconomic or political reasons, many of which are indirectly related to climate change. For instance, if a subsistence farmer's living goes away due to changes in the climate, then you have a climate refugee, or not a climate refugee, a climate migrant. How will it change particular flows of migrants at particular borders where they could become problematic, either for the countries that they're moving to or the countries they left? Because when you move from a certain area, you leave behind a situation which may be bereft of certain skills and talents because the people moved. So this is a very complicated problem. And in trying to guess what will happen at particular places in the future, we really don't know enough right now. The US National Intelligence Council came down to talk to me about this about 10 years ago. They keep being interested. They just published a report which you can get online on environmental migrants. And the question is, will the international framework step up and set general rules for how to treat migrants that have been driven in part by climate or climate change? And number two, will the governments step up and do their job, both the governments that are in the countries of origin and the governments that are in the destination countries, because conditions have to be prepared at both ends so that these situations don't explode into the kind of political turmoil we see in the US or in Europe when large numbers of unexpected migrants arrive. Always keep in mind, however, also that most migration that's related to climate, or actually many other things, is really internal, it's domestic, so that the international aspect, for all its salience, isn't the whole problem.
Well, thank you for that. And that actually leads to, I see Fatou Jeng has joined us. Hi, Fatou, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So Fatou Jeng is the founder of Clean Earth Gambia, and she's also a climate advisor at the UN Secretary General. And Fatou, we really wish that you could have been here with us, but we're really thrilled to see you, at least virtually. And just bouncing off of what Michael Oppenheimer was just speaking, I'd love it if you could talk to us about, because I think it's very important to put faces to the disaster of climate change and people whose lives are being directly affected. Could I ask you to talk just a little bit about how climate change is driving displacement on the ground in Gambia, and how is the country confronting that threat at a grassroots level?
Thank you so much. Really unfortunate that I can't make it in person. These realities that comes with being someone from the global south, these are challenges and all of that. But really, I'm glad to join in person. Just to take it up from there, I come from a region, this is the Sahel, which is one of the most affected when it comes to the impacts of climate change. Climate-related issues, especially climate disasters, have more or less led to a significant impact in the lives and livelihoods of communities. I come from the Gambia, a country with just over 2.5 million people. We're a country that mainly depends on agriculture, farm, in source of income and sustenance. My father is a farmer, and my mom actually does work on vegetable, like selling vegetables and all of that. But over the years, the impacts of climate change has affected the main source of income for my family, and that meant that obviously it is going to affect how we're supposed to live our lives. And just recently, during the rainy season in the Gambia, in 2020, 21, 22, 23 even, climate change has led to massive environmental impacts, leading to flooding and displacement, because when the impact of climate change actually occurred, especially with the flooding, a lot of families actually were displaced, leading to them losing their houses and their main source of income, among others. So that is obviously a challenge, as you can see, especially in continents or regions like Africa, where communities and people mainly depend on the natural environment to support themselves and their main source of sustenance. And if you look at it as well from looking at Niger and other countries like Nigeria, among others, we have seen how climate change has actually led to clashes between farmers and hunters as they scramble for land, among others. And we've also seen how climate change has led to a rise in insecurity, leading to a lot of internal conflict in these countries and in these communities. So if you take a look at it, you can see that in Africa, it is becoming a really big challenge, especially when, climate change is really leading to several other issues, not only displacement, because displacement is just one, but the main source of incomes of people are being lost as we continue to go. Water insecurity is becoming a challenge. Giving access to education for young girls actually is also becoming a challenge, because when climate-related issues occur, obviously women, especially girls, will stay back because they'll have to go or travel for kilometers or hundreds of millions, in fact, of kilometers to be able to just go and gather water or to fetch water to be able to go back to their homes, among others. So the intersection of climate change actually is really broad, especially in the context of Africa. And I really want us to look not only at the issue of displacement, but also other issues that climate change also continues to affect in our African society.
I think it's incredibly important what you just said, and very eye-opening, because when we think about climate migration, sometimes we mainly think, of course, about the devastation for people who essentially, have to leave their homes. But as you just said, it's broader than that. It can also spark conflict, as you said, and economic loss, which is piling devastation on top of devastation. And Fatou, I'd like to come back to you a little bit later on to talk about the issue of climate justice in that context. But before we do that, I wanted to ask a question of our other two panelists who are here. Actually, Biljana, we heard you're from the European, the EBRD. You're the Associate Director, programs that help people access skills and employment. And we heard Fatou talk about one of the things she just said is that women and girls are disproportionately impacted. Can you talk to us briefly about what an international financial institution like the EBRD, how can such a situation be addressed or mitigated?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very important question. We often think about climate change that affects everyone equally, but we don't take into account the fact that women and men are differently impacted, that able-bodied and disabled people do not have the same, the climate does not affect them in the same way. People from minorities, minority groups, people from lower socioeconomic background. Start on a personal note, we took our children to this summer holiday through Europe on a kind of educational trip to take them away from video games. And we ended up having to zigzag through Europe and plan our journey, not by what we want to see, but what kind of floods or fires or storms we have encountered on the road. But this is somebody coming from a privileged background, somebody who has the resources to do that. We are having a completely different story in a community, in people who do not have access to these resources, the way the climate impacts them. So what we do at EBRD, we assess different impacts on, in terms of infrastructure, on access to safe water, sanitation, access to irrigation. We look into access to finance for women, for men, for example, especially related to climate resilient technologies. We look at access to skills and employment for women. We have huge inequalities already in this area. The number of women in STEMs disciplines are a lot lower than men. So the climate change is not only sort of reflecting those inequalities, but it's also exacerbating them. And when we talk about policies that needs to be implemented to balance that out, we need to bear in mind that this policy will also affect women differently than men. So we, for example, take great care of ensuring that women farmers have access to finance, advice, to access to new technologies, for example, drip irrigation or early warning system for various tornadoes or tsunamis or whatever climate catastrophes may be. But also, for example, that women have access to green skills, that women do not lose out of the opportunities that green economy transition brings, and that they are ready to actually benefit from new developments and our new policies and new advancements.
Well, that's so important, and that leads me over to Michael Nash, who we're really very excited to have with us here at the forum and here on this panel. Michael is an artist and an award-winning documentary filmmaker who you made a groundbreaking documentary about basically putting a face on climate migration that was premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, that then made it to Netflix, and as I understand it, is now being put in a new time capsule that's being sent to the moon to document, I guess it's a sort of a very searing part of the documentation about, you know, what humans have done to their own planet. Michael, I want to ask you about, because you traveled to 48 different countries to make this film, but before I ask you to talk, if you don't mind, I would love to show you just a quick 2-minute clip from the preview of Michael's film when it first debuted. If we
Climate change is on a complete collision course right now with civilization as we know it.
We've had lots of civilizations collapse in the past from environmental causes.
I'm certain climate change has occurred.
Our responses at the moment are inadequate in terms of coping with these newly displaced people.
These are really the human faces of climate change.
Nature is now at war with us.
We're going to have to rethink climate change as being some remote environmental issue that the scientists will work out over there.
It's so huge. It's so big that's coming our way. It's almost beyond comprehension.
We are the same. Human race. No difference.
We're dealing with the fact that there's a gap between what the law provides and what the world needs. People cross borders all the time.
That will change all sorts of equations. When you get scarce resources, or if you get a change so radical that people can't function, you have huge displacement.
The threat of refugees as a consequence of climate change is an enormous national security issue.
Europe is spending millions to defend itself against immigration from Africa.
When the Pentagon begins to think about what might happen, that's a clear indication that we have to start taking something seriously.
So Michael, I mean, those images, so that film was debuted in 2010, and yet it seems even more resonant than ever today. What, in your view, what has changed since you made that film? Just tell us a little bit about what you think about that.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank the Athens Democracy Forum and CDI for having me here. A lot has changed. So when we traveled to 48 countries in search of the human face of climate change, there really wasn't a lot of peer-reviewed articles. There wasn't a lot of books on this subject matter. We weren't really even sure what we were going to find. And what we found was this intersection in civilization where overpopulation, overconsumption, lack of resources, and a changing climate seemed to be slamming into each other. And the outcome of that were people being forced to migrate in search of water, food, shelter, really Maslow's hierarchy. When we traveled around the world, there was a lot of questions that I asked that found no answers. And we're in the process of working on a sequel right now. Hopefully we'll start in 2024. Because we believe that if we travel back around to these countries, there's been a decade of brain power put into this subject matter, and we believe those answers perhaps now exist.
What are one or two of the most searing questions that you came away with that you think there might be answers to now?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is this is a really complicated issue, and I should just say that the United Nations was never really happy that I termed this film Climate Refugees. But at the point when this film came out, the UN had not officially given a term to these victims. They now call them environmentally induced migrants. There is an issue with putting the two terms climate and refugee together from a policy standpoint. But this is such a complicated issue, and I think Michael can get into that a little bit. But to give you an example of it, first of all, it's really difficult to define a climate refugee. Most of the time, climate seems to be a threat multiplier that pushes these people, over the brink. But to give you an example, we were in Bangladesh when Cyclone Sidr hit, and 1 million people were displaced. And we were down in the Sundabar region where all the shrimp farmers were. There's not an insurance check coming to bail these people out. FEMA is not there to help these people out. A lot of these folks are now homeless on the streets of Dhaka because of a cyclone that wiped them out. Bangladesh is a country of 155 million people. It's basically at sea level. It's primarily a Muslim country. When they start being forced to relocate, they're either probably going to go to China, which is a communist country, or India, which is a Hindu country. And so one of the things that we weren't really able to dig into deeply is, so what happens when you have 100 million Muslims moving into a Hindu world? They're not going to be called climate refugees. The term, it's going to be religious or political conflict that's going to take place at the borders. And so I think going back around, we're going to be able to define a lot more of the deeper issues on the human face of climate change. I should also just say that, when we, for a lot of you younger folks, and I love what you're doing with with TikTok, and I'd love to speak with you actually afterwards, and perhaps you can be involved with our sequel. But there's just vast challenges that, of identifying all of these people, and I think it's perhaps one of the largest things we will face over the next 100 years.
Yeah, Michael.
To show you the complexity of the problem, we did some modeling of what could happen under climate change in Bangladesh. And we looked specifically at the south coast. And we expected to find large numbers of people moving away. But actually, in our model, not necessarily an accurate representation of the world, they kept moving, except under the most extreme climate change and sea level rise scenarios. They kept moving to the coast. That is, more people were moving to the coast than moving away. And the reasons were, in the world that we project economically, the urban areas on the coast survived for quite a while, and provide job opportunities. So that's not to say that what you said was wrong by any means, but just the complexity of trying to understand what will happen in particular countries at particular times is very difficult right now. And that's what the governments want to know, and particularly because there's a chance they might actually prepare for such situations and not do what they do today, which is wait till chaos breaks loose.
It is very complex, as you say. And Fatou, I wanted to turn back to you. I mean, as you're listening to this conversation, talk to us a little bit about, again, on the ground, how are people getting motivated at a local level to deal with these threats? What are you and your organization, how are you involved in this? And I mean, what is the view about, it's a loaded term, but an important one, climate justice? What does that mean? How is that playing out?
Thank you so much. It's really interesting hearing different perspectives from the different speakers. And just to say at the local level, what we have been doing at Earth Gambia is our focus has mainly been on climate justice, but also trickling down to other issues related to that. Because as I've mentioned in my introduction, Gambia is a country that is facing the adverse effects of climate change, even as a continent where emitting less than 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So as an organization, what we have been doing is we've been focusing a lot on awareness and advocacy. We've been doing some activities on nature-based solutions, among others, and especially issues focusing on gender and climate, the nexus. So over the years, we've been able to work with women farmers in the Gambia, because these are groups that have also been very much impacted by the climate crisis. And also coming from a patriarchal society, we see how that also affects the level of adaptation of some of these groups. So we've been working with women farmers to not only advocate their land rights, but also provide capacity building opportunities for them. We've also been able to mobilize thousands of young Gambians in the country, because we still do not have climate education incorporated in our basic and elementary school system. So as an alternative, we've been training young people in the Gambia to catch them young so that they could be able to join the movement on addressing some of the climate problems. And over the years, we've partnered with the government of the Gambia and the city council. For instance, we partnered with the Banjul City Council, planting over 10,000 coconut trees in Banjul, because Banjul is a city that is vulnerable to sea level rise. So as an organization, we've planted over 30,000 trees over the years, and we've done some other engagements. But when you look at the issue of climate justice, so yeah, that's my son wants to also contribute to the conversation, because young and future generation are also very important as far as the conversation that we're having about climate is concerned. So on the issue of climate justice, I always say we cannot address climate change without centering climate justice, especially in Africa, because there is an urgent need to address the climate crisis. And for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, we are the most vulnerable region actually to climate change. And if we don't address the climate problems, an additional 40 million people in the sub-Saharan region could be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030. And more than 85 million people could be, physically displaced by 2050, and that is more than in any other region in the world. So that is why one of the other speakers mentioned issues of investing in early warning system, among others. But for me, climate justice means making sure that climate adaptation is a priority, especially for the regions that are most impacted, and where climate finance is also a priority, and also where loss and damage is also a priority. Because these are, at the end of the day, when climate-related issues occur, it is these vulnerable and least developed countries that are most affected. And most of these countries and regions do not have the capacity to be able to adapt effectively and efficiently to the impacts of climate change. So if we do not prioritize issues on adaptation and financing and loss and damage, then it would be a challenge, because these countries would continue to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, and they wouldn't have, or they wouldn't actually more or less be ready to effectively address or adapt to the climate problems. So that is why climate justice is very crucial. Climate justice is very key if we want to ensure that there is climate action and there is global collective effort to address the challenges that we are facing.
So let me follow up on that. If climate justice is slow to come through, since part of this issue also depends on discussions with, you know, international governments in countries that basically created this problem that that you guys didn't ask for. I mean, if that justice is slow to come through financially, and hello, who else is joining us on this call? Hello. We're thrilled to see him. Just quickly, I mean, if climate justice doesn't come through in an effective and rapid manner, what is your vision? I mean, what will that part of the world in your backyard look like 10 years from now, given the economic and financial and also social conflict risks that you just pointed to? I mean, is there no hope?
Well, if we don't put climate justice in the heart of our conversations, then there will be a challenge in addressing the other societal issues that we're facing, like the poverty, the economic loss, the issue of access to just basic human rights, or just basic issues that people need to have. So if we don't prioritize climate justice, then it means that we cannot be able to achieve the other societal issues that are very key for our development and our growth. So that is why climate justice should be at the heart of the conversations that we're having, at the heart of our climate adaptation initiatives, because if there is climate justice, then there is going to be social justice, and then there is going to be gender justice, and there is going to be environmental justice in general. And that will intersect, or that will actually more or less touch all the other issues as far as our lives and our livelihoods are concerned. So then that means there's going to be increased displacement, there's going to be increased poverty, there's going to be increased in general problems in terms of accessing basic and fundamental things that are relevant for our lives. So that is why I'm saying when we address climate justice, then every other issue concerning our development and our growth could be easily achieved.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, it's extremely disturbing, you know, this picture that you're painting. And Michael Nash, I see you nodding your head. I mean, is one of the things I presume that maybe you would want to look for is, you know, where, you know, can climate justice, where is climate justice actually happening? Maybe the answer is it's not happening anywhere yet, and certainly not fast enough.
Yeah, this is, when you really get down to it, this is a justice issue at every level. And there is not a lot of justice going on right now with, you know, the climate justice aspect from a global standpoint. But there's hope. You know, there is, I mean, we're sitting in Athens, Greece, where thousands of years ago a bunch of people got together and, you know, decided to create a new narrative. They created democracy, they created philosophy. And so, you know, I hope that, you know, this can be the beginning of all of that. Because these people are being persecuted against for absolutely no reason besides existing where they've lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Yeah. And, you know, where's the justice in that?
Michael?
So there's an element I'd like you to look for, which has come up in recent studies in the academic literature, which is really the problem is human mobility. People have always moved due to changes in conditions or seeing something better somewhere else. What we see with climate change is part of the justice issue, namely people who would have wanted to move can no longer move because their income levels have gone down, and moving isn't free. It can cost a lot of money, even in a poor country. And those are populations are variously called trap populations, or just people whose mobility has been reduced. And it's part of the climate change problem too, because climate change, particularly in countries where people are at a subsistence level, is going to make them fall below that, and they won't have the opportunity to do what they would have done if there had been other changes, namely get up and move somewhere.
Right. I would like to, let me just say that we're going to open the floor to questions, so please get your questions ready and have hands up because we're going to be turning to you soon. But before we do that,
I wanted to raise one question related to climate justice. green economy transition will create winners and losers. There are going to be new job opportunities, new employment, new income generation opportunities related to renewable energy, but they're not going to be huge. A lot of people will lose out. At EBRD, we did a research in our region of operation. About 1 million jobs are are affected by coal industry still, and within including value chain. So we need to at the bank we have in 2020 started an initiative called Just Transition Initiative, and we know the term Just Transition is being used by European Union to help the fossil fuel dependent regions transition to a cleaner economies and cleaner energy without leaving people behind. And we look into not only investing in decarbonizing the large utilities and building new renewable energy capacity, but also looking at how existing workers that will be affected and communities that depend on these industries are going to be reskilled, upskilled, redeployed, either within the local labor market or in the regional context, and how will these regions diversify their economies going forward. So I think that's an element that we should also look into.
It's a very important point. Okay, questions? Please put your hand up so that we can pass you the microphone. Please state your name and who your question is for, and please ask a brief question because we would like to, rather than making speeches or statements. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arushi. I am from India. And my question is for the whole panel. A lot of countries, especially in the US, we have an issue with people who don't believe in climate change. So what do you have to say about climate disbelievers and getting them on board with, our journey here?
And that's an important question. Who would like to take that?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important. In the United States, it's frustrating where we are as a, country with regards to this. It's been so politicized. There's lobbyists that are just driving false narratives. And, one of the things that this film did in 2010 is it brought part of the right into this conversation. And I've consulted with a lot of folks in Hollywood with regards to, socially relevant environmental films and trying to make them where we're not drawing the wedge, a deeper wedge between this party, but actually trying to embrace them and bring them over to understand that, this is science. It's not really that difficult to figure out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's troubling.
Let me just ask that question of Fatou. I mean, you're right there. How do you answer people in other countries who say climate change doesn't really exist, or this is not due to actual climate change?
Well, what I always say is, in one way or the other, we are all experiencing the impacts of climate change. It just might differ in terms of the level of impact that we're having, but every single person is experiencing that.
Yeah.
It's either you're experiencing heat wave, there is flooding, or there are some other environmental or climate-related impacts that we are facing. But what I always say to climate deniers, or what I always say to people that are more or less experienced or facing climate deniers in their work is, we need to make sure we engage them more in the conversations.
Yeah.
We understand it's big politics around just climate deniers, and as the previous speaker mentioned, there are lobbyists and all of that. But we need to get them in the conversations to hear the life stories and experiences of other people in other parts of the world and what they are facing. I think the more we get them engaged in the conversations, the better it might be in terms of changing their narratives and how they see things. Because that way, everyone is, because we have to leave no one behind. So with the conversation, we just need to make sure that we continue to bring them on board. And the more they are included and involved, I think that way it could go a long way in helping change some of the behaviors or some of the narratives people have about climate.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Yes, here in the front.
Hello, my name is Matt Almaty. I'm a student of International Relations and Social Justice and Sustainability at Franklin University, Switzerland. And when I think of the climate crisis, I also think of food security, and particularly the weaponization of food, a topic that was dropped from the forum. My question is that will changes in the climate affect or lead certain countries to leverage food abundances against other countries? So will climate shifts leave some countries with more abundant food sources and other countries with less of those food sources? And will that be leveraged to achieve some form of power against other entities? Thank you.
So,
Michael, would you? Yeah.
There's no question that climate change will eventually affect food prices. Sporadic climate events already do. As climate change goes on, the projections are that crop yields, certain of the main cereal grains, the crop yields will decrease. That'll increase prices on the international market. That affords possibilities that we see playing out with the Ukraine situation of countries using it for political leverage. But how it'll exactly play out, it'll start, the price pressure will be fundamentally originally in the global south. It's going to creep into the global north as warming, if warming passes 2.5 degrees, and that's going to be used, and it's going to be used malevolently.
Okay, we have time for maybe about 2 more questions. Yes, sir?
I would like to ask a practical question. I chair a humanitarian organization, Solidarity Now, where we have helped over 350,000 people here in Greece. And the question is, how we can separate. We have the refugees, where we can help with the asylum process. We have the economic migrants, and I wonder what is the status of, let's say, the legal framework for helping for the asylum climate change migrants. It's something that it was an interesting point that I hear from you, and I want to address it. Where do we stand on this?
That's a very good question. Anybody up here know the answer?
Well, first of all, remember, most people moving permanently due to climate change are not really refugees. They're people who made decisions. They weren't forced to move in some immediate sense. There are going to be a lot of those people. With regard to big disasters, one thing we know is people don't like to move away from home. They move temporarily, and if they can, they come back. Situations like Hurricane Katrina in the United States, which devastated New Orleans, and people didn't come back, those are unusual. We probably will see more of that as these events become more extreme. But basically, there are 2 different categories you have to think about. One is people who made a decision to move, had the time to make a decision, and then there are those who were driven out, they were displaced. Those should get 2 different types of treatments. One's an emergency situation, which can turn into a permanent situation. The other is the person had enough resources to move, thought things out, and wanted to go. The international framework we have isn't set to deal with either of them. There is no category. So the question is, should there be a category? Should there be a category for those displaced? Should those who made a rational, gradual decision, a voluntary decision, sort of, to move, should they be reimbursed for having had to move because the global north imposed this on the global south, for instance?
Well, thank you for that. These are all incredibly complicated questions, and I want to extend once again our deep appreciation to all of our panelists for shedding, hopefully a much brighter spotlight on this. There's still plenty to be resolved, but thank you for your voices in terms of helping us understand this a lot better. Thank you, and we will break from this panel for our next session.